Wouldn't it be nice to have several thought leaders in your industry know and love your brand? Start a podcast. Invite your industry's thought leaders to be guests on your show and start reaping the benefits of having a network full of industry influencers. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Daniel Codella. He is the Senior Content Marketing Manager over at Wrike. Daniel, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks so much for having me on the show, Logan.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to be talking about what marketers can learn from psychological principles and some triggers they can use to actually craft more compelling campaigns. I am really excited to have this conversation with you. You've been doing some research, speaking on this topic. So I think there are going to be a lot of tactical things that marketers can learn from this episode. But before we jump straight into today's topic, I would love for you to give a little context, Daniel, on you and what the team at Wrike is up to these days.
Thanks so much. My name is Daniel Codella. I've worked in marketing my entire career, coming up on 15 years now. I got my start in the music industry. I was a signed artist, and I worked for a music software hardware company, handled all of their marketing and artist relations. Then I led marketing for Zerb, which is a product design agency, one of the most popular in the world. Learned a ton over there, especially about these psychological triggers, working with designers. And now currently I'm a senior content marketing manager at Wrike. I focus on a lot of thought leadership pieces, public speaking. Wrike is a collaborative work management platform. And so we help teams of all sizes, but especially those larger enterprises that maybe have distributed workers around the world, really work together better, collaborate more effectively, and do more with less.
I love it. I know a lot of marketing teams that are trying to do more with less. So love what you guys are up to there, Daniel. So we're going to be diving into, again, how you can use psychological principles and specifically triggers to create more compelling campaigns today. But before we talk about, how we can use these, I think we should spend a little bit of time defining and explaining psychological triggers and maybe have you share some examples of those. Can we start there, Daniel?
Absolutely. So psychological triggers are those psychological motivators, the cognitive biases and behavior patterns that really drive people to action. We have this little tiny almond-shaped cluster of nuclei in our brains called the amygdala, and that controls our emotional response to stimuli. And basically, it's a survival mechanism. We make different judgments. Our brain, in a split second, decides how we feel about something and determines a course of action. And so, when there's more physical threats in the world, that was saving our life, whereas nowadays, in modern times, we don't have those same kind of physical threats, but we do make these split-second judgment calls in the unconscious mind. And so it's really important to be able to, as a marketer, manipulate those triggers effectively so that our campaigns and our messages really delight people and spur that kind of positive emotional response.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Especially in B2B, we tend to give too much space for logic when the truth is, whether it's B2B or B2C, we make decisions based on emotion and then we back them up by logic, right?
Yeah, I was actually pretty stunned to learn there was a study done by Google and CEB Marketing, and they found that B2B customers are significantly more emotionally connected to service providers than normal consumers. And the reason for that is there's just so much more risk. I mean, if I buy, the wrong shampoo or something, that's not that big of a deal. But if I'm in charge of a budget of millions and I make the wrong choice, that's immense risk. So these psychological triggers and appealing to emotions is so much more important with the B2B customer.
Yeah, that is a really great point. As you point out, the emotion tied to the risk. When we think, B2B buyers are more logical, we've developed buying processes and buying committees to try and take the emotion out of it, but it's still definitely there. So I know you wanted to touch on, Daniel, maybe 3 or so examples of psychological triggers, some examples of those, and how we might, talk about those in a marketing context. Can you unpack those for us?
Absolutely. So 3 that kind of come to mind. One would be labeling. We like to think that we're just these unique individual beings and that we're unlike any other humans on the planet, but we're actually a lot more similar than we give each other credit for. And this is the surprising fact. People enjoy being labeled. If the label is positive, we'll actually change our behavior to match it better. And so in the B2B marketing sense, they've done all sorts of studies, and like gold and preferred customers actually spend more money. Super interesting. So you might want to think about how you would label your customers. So what qualities do you really want them to exemplify? And if you start using those terms, they will change their behavior to match it. Like at Wrike, we label our customers as innovative, as productive, as forward thinking. And we actually find that they change their behavior. They participate more in co-marketing opportunities. They try more of our new features. They're more willing to participate in customer stories, customer success stories, all because we've labeled them in those different ways. And there's a second one. I love this one, the Availability Cascade.
Okay.
And basically what that means is the more something is said, the more likely we are to believe it. And so a company like Apple is fantastic at this. They're able to kind of, they have these marketing messages where they talk about these product features in very succinct terms. They have the exact word choice down. And they use these phrases so consistently that we just believe them. And they become the yardstick that every other brand and every other device has to kind of measure against. They tell us that they're the most powerful chip in a smartphone. And they tell us that it's the best screen on a smartphone. And we just hear that message so consistently that we believe it. And it's a kind of a funny example. Have you heard the word halitosis?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it means bad breath. Well, that word was actually made up by Listerine. See, Listerine, they took the Latin word for breath, which is halitus, and the medical sounding suffix of osis, and they made this new term halitosis to kind of invent this problem that their product treated. And so you might be familiar with their tagline, treats the germs that, or kills the germs that cause bad breath. Well, it used to be kills the germs that cause halitosis. And so that's just kind of one of those examples where they use something so consistently and so regular that now that halitosis has become part of our everyday vernacular pretty much. I mean, even dental professionals are using that term. So as a marketer, you might want to think about, what do I want people to know about my product or service? Get very specific and granular with what particular words you want to use, and then use those consistently everywhere. It really does have an effect.
I love that. I didn't even know that backstory of halitosis. So I'm one of the masses that just followed along that's a scientific word that means bad breath.
Yeah, totally.
So we've talked about labeling. We've talked about the availability cascade. The third is curiosity. And I think you had an example with Patagonia, which I think there's so many lessons to learn from that brand. Share with us a little bit there about, how effective brands like Patagonia are using curiosity when it comes to psychological triggers.
Curiosity is one of the most powerful of all human emotions. I mean, just think about all the crazy or even dangerous things that people do to satisfy their curiosity. And so Patagonia did this one ad that just totally blew my mind. It was 2011, the country is crawling out of the recession, and it's Black Friday week, and they release a full-page ad in the New York Times with a picture of their best-selling jacket. And the headline on the top of the ad is, "Don't buy this jacket." It stopped people in their tracks. But at the bottom of the ad, they kind of went into this whole description of their manufacturing process, which really highlighted how amazing their manufacturing process is and how much water it takes to make these jackets and all the testing that's done. And it just caused sales to skyrocket. And for years after that, literally 3 years of increased sales could all be attributed to that specific ad. Another company that did this really well was California Pizza Kitchen. They had an ad campaign where they handed out these yellow envelopes after your meal. And on the envelope, it said, "Don't open." And so what you had to do is you had to come back a second time and have a manager of the restaurant open the envelope, and you had some sort of prize or reward. Well, 2.5 million of those envelopes were turned in because people were just, they were dying of curiosity to figure out if they had won. So it's one of those human emotions that we maybe undervalue, but it's incredibly powerful if you can wield it correctly.
It's story time, and this growth story is about search engine marketing. Okay, so the story revolves around eSub, a project management SaaS company specifically for subcontractors. Even though eSub had incredible customer retention, they struggled with growth. Being a niche service, they discovered that there was little demand expressed for their solutions within search engines. To take on this challenge, eSub hired Directive Consulting, the B2B search marketing agency. After refining targeting, pre-qualifying clicks with an ad copy, and developing custom landing pages, Directive was able to increase eSub's marketing qualified leads by 71%, while decreasing their cost per lead by 65%. I have a hunch that Directive can get these kind of results for you too. So head over to directiveconsulting.com and request a totally free custom proposal. That's directiveconsulting.com. All right, let's get back to this interview.
I think those are fantastic examples of leveraging curiosity. What are some other examples or tactics that folks can think of in a B2B context where they could leverage either these specific psychological triggers you've talked about, labeling, the availability cascade, or curiosity, or others in a B2B context, Daniel?
Well, definitely, there's a whole list of psychological triggers and biases. A powerful one is reciprocity. Give people something and they'll feel obligated to give something back to you. That something might be a referral, it might be a sale, it might be an email address. It's just something else of value. When we provide a lot of value, that creates cognitive dissonance in the person that is receiving that if they don't follow through. So that's an incredibly powerful tool. There's also things like the Zeigarnik or the Zeigarnik effect, where people just love to complete things. Uncompleted tasks just kind of linger in their minds. So if we have a very clear structure, a path that we want our potential customers to go down, showing that visually as a timeline or a progress bar can really impel them to finish and complete it. So there's all sorts of these triggers that we can use, but to use them effectively as a B2B marketer, we really need to have a couple of systems in place. One, you need a system because you need consistency and visibility to understand how you're using this. These aren't one-off things that you can just try and never follow up and expect to have them to work. You really need to implement them across all of your marketing. And so you need visibility into that. You also need a system of experimentation. If you're not running consistent experiments, you're not going to figure out which of these triggers is working most effectively with your audience. And you need to keep learning. I was reading some crazy facts about the half-life of knowledge. And in some industries, the half-life of knowledge is as short as 18 months. So everything that you know in 18 months is completely out of date. As a B2B marketer, we want to be constantly trying new things and pushing our knowledge forward to make sure that we're still being effective. And so same with these triggers. These are appealing to fundamental parts of human nature. but the way that we're using these triggers in our campaigns may be changing all the time.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Daniel. So what do you think is next? What are some of your predictions for the future, if you will, in where the use of these psychological triggers could start to make its way more into effective B2B marketing?
Oh, that's an awesome question. There's so many new frontiers for B2B marketing that I'm currently experimenting with and watching very closely. So many lines between B2C and B2B marketing are blurring. Three kind of come to mind specifically. One is this whole stories format. Snapchat invented it, but it's been adopted since then by Instagram and Facebook and WhatsApp. It's this whole new way of telling a story. And only about 53% of SaaS brands are using stories. I expect that number to grow as the format becomes more popular. I also see new levels of interactivity. For a lot of stories, you're very limited as to what the user can do. They can maybe like, or they can swipe up. But I think we'll start to see even more interactivity and exchange of data so that we can really, in real time, gather information about our audiences and have them participate. So that's a really neat interactive format that I'm watching closely.
Yeah, I would love to see where the interaction goes there, because I've seen that. It is, I would completely agree with you. There's definitely some limiting aspects, and it's an interesting one to me as well, because you mentioned, several platforms that have rolled out a stories format. YouTube rolled out a stories format, and I'm like, they're already video. How is there a stories format? I'm like, well, let's see where this goes, right?
Yeah, I mean, marketing has really become a real-time exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And so as marketers, we're kind of losing a little ground in how much prep time we have to create all these campaigns, but we have this amazing ability now to interact and tell these kind of real-time stories. So that's an area that I can't wait to dive into further. A second that is really interesting to me is the whole dark social networks. These conversations that happen in WhatsApp or in text message threads or, WeChat, Facebook Messenger. That's a hard area as a marketer, especially a B2B marketer, to get into. And we might think maybe that it's only teens that are using those different services. But I just read an interesting fact from Radium One. They found that 46% of consumers age 55 and older share only on those networks. So they're not on traditional social media. They're having these conversations in these private threads and things. So, as a B2B marketer, how do I get into those conversations? What are the best ways to, steer those conversations towards our brands in a way that feels authentic still and doesn't, push people away? I think that's super interesting. And then a third area that I'm watching closely is the rise of these kind of virtual worlds. In the 90s, we had a couple of virtual networks and things, but it's grown a lot more sophisticated these days. We have like Fortnite that's just taken the world by storm. And I don't know if you've ever watched like a teenager play Fortnite, but they're playing the game, but they're also having these like group conversations. It's kind of become like the new mall, the new hangout spot. And, the age of gamers has increased significantly. And so you have a lot of adults on these networks as well. So is there opportunity to have a marketing message, even a B2B marketing message in these kind of virtual worlds? We've seen a couple of brands have forays into this. Wendy's sponsored a food fight mission. And so although Wendy's wasn't represented in the game, they did kind of draw attention to it. And they even made a Twitch page. And so millions of minutes of video are watched and tons of comments. You even had the NFL that were selling jerseys in Fortnite. So, the rules are changing. The B2C and B2B worlds are blending. There might be an opportunity to have these kind of B2B marketing messages in these traditionally consumer worlds.
Wendy's is a great example of a consumer brand that, has been at the forefront. I mean, their Twitter feed is just hilarious for, a fast food chain, right? That's on social. So it doesn't surprise me that they're at the bleeding edge of other things and trying new frontiers and new channels. So you make a lot of good points there about, possibly some things to watch for the future, Daniel. I love the specific triggers that you talked about today that we can think about and find ways to leverage as B2B marketers. So, we talked about labeling, the availability cascade, curiosity, looking at the law of reciprocity and that cognitive dissonance that can happen there. And then what was the last one you mentioned, the need to feel completion on something where we can lean into maybe gamifying a process or something like that?
Yes, the Zeigarnik or the Zeigarnik effect. We're compelled to finish things. We hate it when things are left unfinished. So there's definitely multiple ways to use all of these different triggers in different aspects of our marketing, and it can compel people to action. And 95% of our decision making takes place in our subconscious mind, and we might fool ourselves into thinking that that's not the same in the B2B world because of longer, sales cycles and more stakeholders. But think about all of the different touch points along that customer journey that are driven by emotions. I mean, just getting someone to call you back or to give you their email or to let their, superior know and to get them on a call with you. Those are all driven by emotions. And so the space for these psychological triggers to be used in marketing almost plays a greater role in the B2B world.
Absolutely. And also to your previous comment about the risk associated, the career risk, the financial risk that plays heavy in B2B buying decisions. That's part of the reason why we bring in multiple stakeholders and we form these buying committees to try and spread that out. But that risk is still there, and that risk affects the emotion of the decision. I think you're spot on there, Daniel. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation, man. As I mentioned at the top of the episode, you have been speaking on this topic. It's one that you're passionate about, digging into, kind of looking at emerging trends. If anybody listening to this would like to stay connected with you, hear you speak, or ask you some follow-up questions, what's the best way for them to find you, stay connected, any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I would absolutely love that. I love talking shop about these things. I'm most active on Twitter, so you can reach me at Mr. Codella. That's spelled Codella. I'll also be speaking at the Digital Summit Series. I'll be in Atlanta in May and Portland in June. And then, of course, I'd love for you to check out some of my writing on Wrike.com/blog, and definitely give us a try if you're looking for ways to kind of bring your team together, collaborate, and accomplish more with less.
I love it. Daniel, this has been a fascinating conversation. I really enjoyed having you on the show today. Thanks so much, man.
Thank you, Logan.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.